Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to talk about love. As a matter of fact, to talk about love in Buster Keaton films. After recently revisiting many Buster Keaton films, binge watching is more accurate. I am completely obsessed. And as I was doing so, I couldn't help but take particular interest in the romantic aspect of the films or the love aspect of these movies, as I found it a common denominator in most of them. Surely Buster Keaton is known for being first and foremost a superb comedian, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, master of the film medium, rightfully praised for his awe-inspiring, innovative stunts and film techniques. All in all, Buster Keaton was, as Orson Welles said, the supreme artist and one of the most beautiful people ever to be photographed. Being all what I just said about Buster Keaton true, I also think that in his films that realistic human approach also informs the way love appears in his films. At least that's what I aim to talk about in today's video. I will be focusing though on Buster Keaton's independent productions, that is the two-reelers and his long feature films right up to the Cameraman, the first film he made for MGM. So today we'll precisely take a look at the role of love in those productions, while I try to do justice to this formidable artist whose impact, whose contribution to cinema is extraordinary, whose art I admire and I love, and whose face I also find one of the most beautiful that has ever appeared on screen. One of the first things that I noticed when I watched again many of his independent films that perhaps I hadn't paid that much attention before was that his characters were almost invariably attempting to prove themselves in some way. And so his journey as a character often implies starting off as a rather incompetent or inept man to, through persistence and determination, become the hero of the story, finally uniting with the woman he loves and winning her heart. It is my impression that the way he sees love and presents it has a more realistic basis as opposed to a sentimental or idealized vision. I got the impression that everything he puts himself through, everything he attempts, is always, I feel, motivated by love and thus a driving force, if not the main driving force for him. And again, responding almost to a need to prove himself worthy. At least that structure, I feel, becomes very apparent in movies like Sherlock Jr. or The General. And even though in those productions there is not, again, a romantic comedy structure in which we see him first falling for the girl or how he develops feelings or how those feelings come to blossom, still he finds a way through his incredible physicality to demonstrate his feelings, something that I feel is one of his most amazing qualities as an actor. As many of you know, Buster Keaton's most characteristic on-screen persona, aside from the rich, lovable dimwit that he plays in films like Steamboat Bill or The Navigator or Battling Butler, he was frequently this endearing, down-on-his-luck sap who always had to make extra effort to obtain anything he would aspire to, also often being looked down on for not being your typical male stereotype. So when it comes to love and finding a female partner in his movies, again, the approach, or I think the vision behind it, is a very realistic one, in which almost without exception, he combines again romantic gestures with a succession of quests, which are essentially the gags that set him in a path that, in my opinion, is similar to the knight-errant journey. But whereas this type of journey that we see in medieval literature that was essentially motivated by idealism and by goals that were often illusory. In Buster Keaton's case, his motivations, in my opinion, are very tangible, very straightforward, but that doesn't mean that there is no emotion and no romance behind it. Also, as many of you know, in practically all his independent productions, he starts off in disadvantage from a rival that he has to compete with in order, again, to prove himself worthy and to end up winning the girl's heart, so to speak. These competitors are often physically and morally their opposite. One of his most frequent collaborators in all those independent productions was vaudeville actor Joe Roberts, an idea that he probably picked up from working with Roscoe Arbuckle. But in his independent productions, these adversaries are often also greedy and completely oblivious of the woman's feelings, as though the girl is just a trophy, whereas for Buster, it is someone he cares for. If we compare it again with a more classical knight's quest, Buster's real assets in this journey, in this hero's journey, in this transformational journey, are his inner qualities rather than his amazing physical strength and grace. It is, I feel, his honesty, bravery, and the fact, again, that he truly cares and would do practically anything, even though he might have been misjudged initially. In that sense, I feel Buster does follow a certain notion of chivalry, only to capsize it with his own notion of how the times of need, greed, and speed are. Once again proving that his intuitive knowledge and his instinct were far ahead of his time. Believe it or not, I'd like to comment here for a little bit about the epic, fantastic musical number of Singin' in the Rain, the one that we all know with Gene Kelly dancing and singing in the rain and showing a marvelous display of not only also physical prowess, but also of explosion of feeling. Because as silent film accompanist and historian Ben Modell points out in a video that I will link down below, there is a scene quite similar in Buster Keaton's The Cameraman that also marvelously evokes the same feelings in a very, very similar scenario. So much so that, as he explains, if you forget about the singing and the dancing, the structure of the scene seems to have inspired, again, Gene Kelly and Stanley Donen for Singin' in the Rain. Buster Keaton in The Cameraman also uses rain as a very powerful motive. Also, storms and water and rain was an element that he would often use for his gags and his action sequences. But I also feel that, again, in The Cameraman, rain in this case has a very powerful love symbolism, conveying also the idea that love makes you feel invincible. I believe that that feeling, that spirit is present both in The Cameraman and later on in Singin' in the Rain. Whether that was a direct inspiration or not, I don't think there's proof for that. But in any case, it is a wonderful testament to, again, Buster Keaton's immense contribution to cinema, whether it was a conscious or an unconscious source. Talking also about his two-reelers or his shorter independent films, in 1 week, released in 1920, we find the newlywed couple formed by, again, Buster Keaton and the fantastic Sybil Seeley, who received a build-it-yourself, essentially a DIY house kit, as a wedding gift and also a piece of land. And as many of you know, if you love Buster Keaton, this is one of the most innovative films. It is stunning, it is awe-inspiring, and also incredibly funny, incredibly charming. I also find 1 week one of the best visual metaphors of what I am trying to illustrate with this anonymous quote that I used as the intertitle for this part of the video. To me, it's almost like this short film masterpiece stands as a representation of the approach that Buster Keaton had towards love, towards relationships, towards romantic relationships, which is one of a mutual partnership and one of standing beside one another no matter the circumstances, and thunder and rain when your house looks absolutely bonkers. Love is the foundation upon which one can continue facing life together and surviving. That is what I meant by a more practical or realistic approach to love. And so this film turns out to be absurdly funny, but also incredibly insightful, and once again incredibly ahead of his time. And lastly, aside from trains, boats in particular also constitute one of the most present vehicles in Buster Keaton's independent productions. Just thinking of the wonderful two-reelers and long feature films such as The Love Nest, Hard Luck, The Boat, The Navigator, or Steamboat Bill Jr., again one of my personal favorites. Seeing Buster Keaton in a boat, aside from trains, has to be one of my favorite images to watch. Particularly The Navigator, released in 1924, in which a comical pair of wealthy socialites, namely Buster Keaton again and Catherine Maguire, they find themselves alone and adrift in a big ocean liner, and it presents yet again another chance to see the rocky early stages of being a couple, even though in this film they are not married, they are not even a couple when they find themselves in that ocean liner. It channels pretty much the same idea as though they were newlyweds. So similarly to what I was just commenting on one week in The Navigator, he presents these situations and comical conflicts to our delight. And besides the joke relying on the fact that these two characters are just plain inept because they've had always servants to do things for them and they don't even know how to boil an egg or how to open a can. In the film, we see how slowly but surely they start improving themselves with the help of one another, motivated by one another. And this is a very necessary partnership in order to survive the insane circumstances they have to face. So it is all a tale of survival, but also a very bumpy way into realizing again that we are in the same boat. Curiously enough, for me, one of the funniest sequences in The Navigator is in fact when they have to find that they are in the same boat and they can hear one another, but they can't figure out where the other is. One of my favorite scenes from the film. And also in all these features, as I was saying before, if there are other authors who have found a commentary on how absurd modern world or modern life is, in a way I think he is foreseeing many of the contemporary problems that couples have to face even nowadays, like miscommunication, societal pressures, alienation, and difficulty in finding someone in the first place. So once again, I feel that in his movies, the only way to survive is by finding and building a solid partnership, one that's based essentially on love. Alright, so that was all for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you find it interesting. What an immense pleasure really to discuss Buster Keaton's work. It was also very difficult for me to put together. Discussing Buster Keaton is already difficult enough, but the topic of love is quite massive. So again, it took me longer than I expected to put together something that I felt would do justice to both love and Buster. So I hope in any case that you've enjoyed it. It is, as always, an excuse to discuss people that I admire and also find new ways to see and appreciate their amazing talent. So as always, if you have any thoughts on the topic and on Buster Keaton films, feel free to leave a comment down below. Buster Keaton is also a fantastic figure to talk about. As a matter of fact, as many of you would know, there are 2 books released this year on Buster Keaton. So again, fascinating topic. It is always wonderful to learn more about Buster Keaton and find new ways to appreciate his extraordinary art. So finally, I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you had fun watching this video. As always, thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for your support, for your love for classic movies. And as always, stay safe, take care, and see you all in my next video. Bye!